Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for being here for this amazing and wonderful and interesting, invigorating conversation we're about to have. My name is Heidi Holder, and I'm the Frederick P. Rose and Sandra P. Rose Chair of Education at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and I am delighted to welcome you to tonight's panel, Celebration and Resistance, Mexican Prints at the Vanguard. So, normally there would be some sort of a band, so I just really wanted to I'm really grateful that this conversation is happening at the Met this afternoon. I'm really glad that we actually have a full house. So that's wonderful. So the exhibition itself features over 130 works, including woodcuts, lithographs, screen prints by artists such as Posada, Diego Rivera, Jose Clemente Orozco, and Leopoldo Mendez. Mexican Prints at the Vanguard explores how prints was central to the artistic identity and practice in Mexico and highlights their effectiveness in addressing social and political issues, just the way that prints and graphic arts still do today in our own society. Now, after the Mexican Revolution in 1920, printmaking proved to be the ideal medium for artists wanting to address social and political concerns and voice resistance for things like the rise of fascism around the world. Artists also turned to printmaking to reproduce Mexican murals from the 1920s and to create exhibition posters, prints for popular press, portfolios celebrating Mexican dress and customs. And most of the artworks in the show that I hope have you all had a chance to see the show yet? You've not? If you had, wonderful. So most of the artworks in the show were a gift to the Met's collection from the French-born artist Jean Charlot, who in the mid-1940s acted on behalf of the museum to acquire prints from Mexico. This is really much of it is in the Met's collection. Now, today's panelists will discuss the role that aesthetics play in shaping and circulating political ideologies across a range of art forms, including printmaking, poetry, and performance. They will share personal insights and details about their own practices, considering the continued potential that arts has to advocate and enact social change even today. And when I say today, I put that in air quotes, right? So I want to introduce the moderator of this panel very soon, but I wanted to just draw your attention to something because this is events like this are a larger suite of an interest in engagement with Spanish language programming, as well as social and political content. So you would have seen on your chair the Dia de los Muertos at the Met Cloisters, which is going to be happening on the 13th of October, which is an intergenerational day. It's in the Washington Heights neighborhood, so it's music, storytelling, all kinds of wonderful things. Just let you to keep an eye on an ear out for what's going on at the Met in terms of programming like this and others for many types of people. So it is now my pleasure to introduce the moderator of this panel, Miriam Basilio. Miriam M. Basilio is Associate Professor of Art History and Museum Studies at NYU. Prior to joining New York University, she was a curatorial assistant at the Departments of Print and Sculpture and Drawings at the Museum of Modern Art, where she co-curated the exhibitions Tempo and Caribbean and Latin American Art, MoMA at El Museo, which was co-organized with El Museo del Barrio. What is important for you to know is something that's upcoming. Her book on the history of MoMA's modernist canon and the very idea of Latin American art, which we take for granted in this time, will be published in 2025. So I'd like to thank Miriam for joining us, and I want to give Aurelius warmly welcome her to what is about to happen next. Thank you, everybody.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here this evening. I'm going to have the pleasure to introduce our wonderful speakers, and then we can hear what they have to say. So the first speaker is Gabriela Rangel. Gabriela Rangel is a curator and writer based in Brooklyn, New York. From 2019 to 2021, she was artistic director of the Museo de Arte Latinoamericano de Buenos Aires, MALBA. Prior to this position, she was Director of Visual Arts and Chief Curator at America Society from 2004 to 2019. Rangel has curated and co-curated numerous exhibitions on modern and contemporary art, as well as solo shows of artists like Tecla Tofano, Elsa Gramco, Eric Mayenberg, Silvia Gruner, Carlos Cruz Diez, Marta Minujín, Gordon Mata Clark, Diego Arturo Herrera, Jose Leo Nilsson, and Shul Solar, just to name a few. She has published articles in Hyperallergic, Letras Libres, Revista Eñe, Artist Shock, Art in America, Parquet, The Brooklyn Rail, and Art Nexus. She's edited numerous books and contributed to many publications. And she is a member of ICA America and a researcher at the Vartan Gregorian Center for the Research at Humanities in the New York Public Library. And then we also have with us this evening Mónica de la Torre. Her most recent book of poems and experimental translations is Repetition 19, published by Nightboat. Other collections include The Happy End, All Welcome from Ugly Duckling Press, A Riff on a Riff of Kafka's America, and Public Domain from Roof Books. She has published several books in her native Mexico City, including Taller de Taquimecanografía, written jointly with the eponymous Women Artists Collective that she co-founded. With Alex Balguiu, she co-edited the international anthology Women in Concrete Poetry, 1959 to 79, published by Primary Information, and is co-editor of the volume Reversible Monuments, Contemporary Mexican Poetry from Copper Canyon Press. She's the recipient of a 2022 Creative Capital Grant and the 2022 Foundation for Contemporary Art C.D. Wright Award for Poetry, and she teaches poetry at Brooklyn College. And new collection, Pause the Document, is forthcoming next year. And finally, last but not least, we have artist Daniel Guzman. He digests, absorbs, and recombines musical and literary references with a strategic and contagious sense of humor. Comics and cartoons, song lyrics, pre-Hispanic iconography, and sensational press clippings, residues of his daily life in Mexico City, and more recently in Guadalajara, combine and reconfigure as part of his vocabulary. His drawings are guided by his hand's intuition, which translates his references and imagination onto paper. He has been the recipient of various grants and awards from the Mexican Ministry of Culture, including the Sistema Nacional de Creadores, FONCA, Jóvenes Creadores, and the first place from the Segundo Concurso de Instalación Exteresa Arte Actual. And in 2000, he was a resident at the International Studio and Curatorial Program here in New York. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you for inviting us to be here in such a good company. I'm honored to be talking about this amazing exhibition. The exhibition is really beautiful and I encourage you to visit. I saw it again for the second time and I discovered things that I haven't thought about it. So I think it's an exhibition that requires more than one visit. I'm going to talk about woodcut, which is a process of printmaking based on carving and pattern into the surface of a block of wood. I would like to compare the technique of woodcut. Let me put me in this. I would like to compare the technique of woodcut to a site-specific floor conceived by Doris Salcedo for Fragmentos. Doris Salcedo is a Colombian artist. A space of art and memory in Bogota, inaugurated in 2018 to commemorate victims of decades of violence in Colombia. The floor, which looks like an inverted relief, like a woodcut, was made by melting weapons used in the Colombian War, which were then given the form of uneven floor tiles by women victims of sexual violence during the war in Colombia. This counter-monument was a matrix for an intervention by Mexican artist Tania Candiani, Demining, presented earlier this year that I curated. Full disclosure. Candiani made an immersive image and sound projection of Fragmentos floor elaborated through a program of artificial intelligence. Both artists, Salcedo and Candiani, consider their practices as form of experimental activism. The exhibition Mexican Prints at the Vanguard unearthed an outstanding collection of prints and illustrated books that spans from the 18th to the 20th century, offering a new source of research on the definition of modernity vis-a-vis activism. This collection of prints, which remained dormant at the museum vaults, was largely shaped by Jean Charlot, a French-born artist who became, like other expats in Mexico before him, such as Lenora Carrington and Francis Alice, integral part of the Mexican art scene in the 20th century. Charlotte played an important role in the dissemination of the technique of woodcut printing in the 20s and 40s in Mexico. This, by then already an old-fashioned technique, was embraced by local artists and writers as a cosmopolitan experimental tool for making national revolutionary art. Woodcut, like muralism before, reverberated with local traditions in Mexico. The innovative use of this anachronistic medium came together with the appropriation of popular art by modernist artists, who were also inspired by revolutionary ideals. Charlotte, together with Mexican artists, combined the formal directness of woodcut with formal graphic procedures of the historical avant-garde. This avant-garde strategy is present in the cover and interior illustrations of Estridentismo founder Manuel Maple Arce important book. I think Monica is also presenting this. Urbe, Superpoema Bolchevique en cinco cantos. Despite the fact that Charlotte didn't stay in Mexico, we must note that he kept important lifelong connections to artists such as José Clemente Orozco, David Alfaro Siqueiros, Javier Guerrero, Diego Rivera, and lesser known yet important estridentistas, as well as members of the Taller de Gráfica Popular. The social vocation of printmaking Charlotte's aesthetic choices were in tune with the aesthetic developments in Mexico after muralism, which, according to curator Mark McDonald, who's not here tonight, unfortunately, aim at constructing a modern nation. The social vocation of printmaking in Mexico precisely highlights the tensions already announced in the exhibition's title. A vanguardist approach to radical art making meant, in the Mexican context, inexpensive processes of production and reproducibility as truly as democratic activity. Charlotte's vision as an insider, truly immersed in the study and practice of printing techniques, both as maker as well as a historian, culminates this safeguarding of the popular engraver José Guadalupe Posada's satirical prints. Posada is an extraordinary figure whose work configures the Mexican imaginary to date. For instance, let me show you. For instance, Posadas illustrated the femicide of a young girl by her father with the brutality of today's critical perspective against patriarchal violence. In this sense, Charlotte was visionary enough to acquire works by women printers, such as Lola Cueto, Mariana Jalpolsky, Maria Marin de Orozco, and Tina Modotti, the very well-known photographer, radical photographer, which, with Posadas and Carlos Mérida, are perhaps the highlights of this Met collection, and not the usual suspects. Jumping into the uncertainties of the 21st century after the COVID-19 pandemic, and with global manifestations of unrest, perhaps not so far from the sleepless journeys of the beginning of the 20th century in Mexico and in Europe, I propose to evoke Demining, Tania Candiani's site-specific installation in Bogota, made in Bogota. Oh, this is another slide that I skip of the women artists in the exhibition. I was talking about the Mexican version of the site-specific installation in Bogota de Tania Candiani as a contemporary version of Mexican revolutionary woodcut prints. Demining was made by fabricating a device with an artificial intelligence program, enabling a machine to symbolically remove the mines by reading and interpreting the image and sound stemming from the floors of fragmentos. Also the floor at the Plaza de las Tres Culturas in Tlatelolco in Mexico. The materiality of the floors project multiple sounds and textures that show their poisonous making by the seed of violence. The images that resulted from the visualizations of AI device can be described as enlarged woodcuts made of pixels. Just like a woodcut prints, the printed areas of Candiani's demining are the height ones carved out of the block, while the deep ones are cut out because they do not retain ink and will remain blank in the final print. Candiani also created photogravures, produced of still images recorded by the demining device, as well as a vinyl record with the sounds of the floors of Tlatelolco, Mexico City, and Bogota. The images made by artificial intelligence readings from the floors are both sides comprise analog archives of atrocities that can enlighten us about the radical extent of experimentations inherent to some of the political woodcut posters made by members of the Taller de Gráfica Popular. In them, the raw texture of wood block creates a visual counterpoint to the textual denunciation of war and fascism on printed propaganda. Candiani's operation bridges the past and the present through the notion of contemporaneity as defined by Giorgio Agamben, the philosopher. Candiani as Posadas hold their gaze in their own time to perceive its darkness and undertones. I feel it is necessary to consider Candiani's demining in this context precisely because it aims to activate gestures that trace intricate lines from a variety of languages, codes, and writing systems. Her intention to unravel signs and functions, both analog and electronic, made them resonate in all techniques, such as the mine detector converted into a video camera and sound recorder to create an immersion on violence. Paired to the use of woodcut, the oldest printed technique, Candiani's recovery of practices on the brink of disappearing serves as a forensic crossroads where media and temporalities shift toward shedding light on the darkness of the present. Candiani's use of algorithm and artificial intelligence underscores the potential activism to be extracted from these technological tools by and at large dominated by entertainment today. Like the Mexican post-revolutionary artists' experimental use of woodcut and prints to convey relevant discussions of social political change using an outdated medium that represented its spirituality. Candiani's immersive installation of video and sound doesn't attempt to distract, but to pull out the violence of the floors as bodily experience to the viewer. It also sets up a singular relationship between Candiani and her time, allowing her to keep distance and proximity. The very definition of contemporaneity dictates an awareness of the need to maintain critical distance to our own time. I will dare to state that the liquefied metal tiles made from weapons used in the Colombian armed conflict, forged by women victims of sexual violence in collaboration with Doris Salcedo, and the 3 types of stone occupying the surface of the Plaza de las Tres Culturas offers such an awareness to Tania Candiani in her Requiem for the Dead, for corpses whose bones will not be bleached by the rain. They seem to inhabit the brutality of evil, that one, the Leopoldo Méndez print on José Martínez Ramírez, murdered in Cuatomatitla, made in 1938, is in the exhibition. Thank you so much.
Buenas noches. Voy a hablar en español porque la exposición es mexicana y tengo que hablar en español. Quiero agradecerle a Mark McDonald la invitación para venir a colaborar en la charla con la gente que está en la mesa ahora para platicar, y también quiero dar las gracias al museo por la invitación. Hice un texto. Creo que estaba en el orden tuyo, Mónica, antes. Aquí está. Dice, la literatura trabaja la política como conspiración, como guerra. La política como gran máquina paranoica y ficcional. Ricardo Piglia. Citas falsas y mitos. Hace un tiempo, como quien deliberadamente regresa al pasado a buscar una experiencia perdida, fui a un cine viejo de la calle de Niño Perdido a ver una reposición de Total Recall, un filme de ciencia ficción de Paul Verhoeven, con Schwarzenegger. La gente que asistió al cine era una mezcla variopinta de viejos y gente muy joven, todos con aire medio provinciano. Habían ido a ver una película de acción y hay mucha acción en esa película. Pero como la historia... perdón, pero se me olvidó. Está la traducción aquí, perdón, pero se me había pasado. Pero como la historia es de Phil K. Dick, por debajo circula un argumento muy sincronizado con el imaginario actual. Un gran relato de Dick. We can remember it for you, wholesale. Nosotros podemos recordarlo por usted. Publicado en 1966 y reescrito en 1990 para un típico filme de clase B, pero de gran presupuesto. Se podría tomar este cruce múltiple de lugares míticos y emociones antiguas y géneros populares como punto de partida para una discusión sobre historias personales y las ficciones propias. En principio, el tema de la película es la memoria artificial y los recuerdos ajenos. Como el lenguaje para William Burroughs, la memoria tiende a ser considerada un virus, un elemento extraño que se puede injertar y que puede invadir al sujeto y cambiarle la vida. En ese mundo de vivencias virtuales, donde se ha perdido el sentido de la memoria privada, la utopía reside en construir artificialmente la experiencia y vivir como propias vivencias que nunca se han vivido. Ricardo Piglia. De niño y adolescente, mis encuentros y lecciones con las ideologías del capitalismo y del socialismo, sus guerras utopías, se dieron en los frentes del consumo de la cultura popular. En las películas, las series de televisión y los cómics. Cosas no vividas, memorias ajenas, implantadas en mi psique, como le ocurre al personaje de la película de Total Recall. Durante la proyección de la película, creo que me quedé dormido por un microsegundo y en ese dormevela mi memoria me llevó a por escenas de las muchas series de televisión que vi de niño. Algunas de ellas incorporaban la idea de una conspiración mundial, orquestada por unos invasores alienígenas que se hacían pasar por agentes del FBI o de la CIA, que abducían a sus víctimas para dominarlos y llevar a cabo la conquista del gobierno de los Estados Unidos y del mundo. Cambiar la historia es hacer algo que no puede ser exactamente descifrado o identificado. Es crear o demandar un misterio, dice Grail Marcus. Mi inconsciente seguía parlando en medio de la proyección de la película y la imagen de miles de partisanos muertos en las batallas en contra de los fascistas se sobrepuso en la pantalla de mis ojos. Salían de sus tumbas para marchar a las ciudades cercanas, pero horrorizados por lo que encuentran allí, el residuo de aquello por lo que pensaron haber muerto, dan marcha atrás y vuelven a sus hoyos en la tierra. Sean Bonnet. Perdón, creo que me falta una aquí. Sí, creo que falta una cita, pero bueno. Escribe Canetti. Después de una batalla, la sangre tiñe de rojo las piedras. La palabra guerre significa grito, llamada. Slow gain era el grito de guerra de los muertos. Más tarde se convirtió en la palabra eslogan. Sí, todos los muertos gritan, pero sus palabras son eslogans en las bocas de los vivos. Fabián Casas. La cultura popular estaba siendo viralizada con teorías conspiratorias y en otras de sus fases, los alienígenas tomaron el cuerpo de los criminales de guerra nazis que escaparon hacia Estados Unidos y Sudamérica, enfundados ahora en trajes y rostros de hombres blancos de bien, científicos, empresarios, burócratas de los servicios de inteligencia que trabajaron para levantar el muro de la Guerra Fría en todas las fronteras del orbe mundial. Aquí, allá, siguen apareciendo informes sobre la influencia directa de los nazis. El dato más insistente se refiere a Walter Ruff, el ex jefe de las SS en Milán. Ruff, culpable de Nuremberg de asesinatos en masa, fue el inventor de las cámaras móviles de gas. Huyó a Chile. Alemania Occidental había fracasado en sus repetidos intentos de extraditarlo. Había rumores acerca de que estaba dirigiendo el sistema de prisiones de Pinochet, dirigiendo a la DINA y planificando campos de trabajo para niños. Grail Marcus. Al salir del cine, me puse a mirar los carteles de las películas que se exhibían en el cine. Esos carteles, con sus diseños, imágenes de colores y tipografías modernas, me hicieron recordar algunos de los miles de grabados populares que se publicaron a principios y mediados de México, del siglo XX en México, y que formaban parte de la difusión de las luchas antifascistas, de las luchas nacionalistas, anticolonialistas, revolucionarias y antifascistas. En esta infatigable lucha en contra de la propaganda del fascismo capitalista mundial, que ha ido mutando de cuerpos y de medios de difusión para extender su virus, en que su más reciente encarnación ha tomado la forma de las redes sociales en Internet. Ahora se extienden por todas las ciudades, todos los cuerpos, todos los cerebros y todos los sistemas nerviosos, y han ido incubando como el huevo de alien permanentemente en nuestros sueños y deseos y angustias, para un día brotar de nuestras entrañas como ese octavo pasajero que destruye a la tripulación de la nave Nostromo en la que viajamos por este universo frío y silencioso, indiferente. A nosotros nos ha tocado la misión de asistir al crepúsculo de la piedad. Roberto Arti. Gracias.
Hello, everybody. It's really great to be here. Thank you so much for all the staff who made this possible, to ISAC in particular for putting together this PowerPoint presentation, and Mark McDonald, the curator of the exhibition, and Miriam for moderating. Let's see. So here we go. Oh, I see. I guess I was supposed to go second, but I was told something else. Here we go. Okay, so you're getting a preview of what I'm going to talk about. Okay, here we go. So walking through the first gallery of the superb exhibition we are here to celebrate, I kept overhearing passersby saying, fascismo, 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 in a variety of accents. I hadn't gotten to the displays of posters denouncing fascism, so I wasn't sure what they were referring to. I was happily absorbed by the unmistakable picaresque humor of the broadsides and publications featuring José Guadalupe Posada's characteristic skeletons. It was then that I serendipitously ran into a student of mine in a translation workshop I teach at Brooklyn College. She could not believe the coincidence. She said she had just been telling her friend she wished I or someone from the class was there to translate the text alongside the images in the lively prints in the show. To read the materials in Spanish certainly deepens one's appreciation of the many layers of artistry involved in the works on display. And perhaps as importantly, allows one to track the noticeable tonal shifts from the text written during the Porfiriato, Porfirio Díaz dictatorship, that is, to those written in post-revolutionary Mexico. The broadsides illustrated by Posada's calaveras or skeletons, for example, feature unattributed rhymed burlesque verse in a traditional Mexican form, itself called a calavera or skeleton. Written calaveras are defined as a series of festive verses written in November on the occasion of the Day of the Dead, intended as the epitaphs of living persons. In other words, these are post-mortem epitaphs written with the purpose of skewering the subject in question. The genre continues to be popular, and in the exhibition is exemplified, for instance, by the broadsides lampooning the lack of independence of the mainstream press. Take, for instance, Skeleton Riding Bicycles, which you see on the screen, whose headline, per the wall label, reads, "From this famous hippodrome on the racetrack, not even a single journalist is missing. Death is inexorable and doesn't even respect those that you see here on bicycles." Among the identified skeletons are the newspapers Voz de México, Patria, and El Universal. What follows underneath those calaveras are unattributed calaveras, written calaveras, on the death of newspapers either repressed by Porfirio Díaz's regime, such as the satirical rag El Hijo del Aguizote, a classic, which translates as the son of the nuisance or the son of the pain in the ass. And it was founded in 1895. or newspapers with no credibility given their official nature. So I will give you an example of a calavera. So the one for El Hijo del Aguizote reads, El hijo del aguizote, por una caricatura que armó un tremendo mitote, fue a dar a la sepultura. The hijo del aguizote, because of a caricature that caused a tremendous ruckus, ended up in the sepulcher. The avant-garde poetry publications that emerged in the turbulent aftermath of the revolution manifested a visual and typographical vocabulary similar to that of the many political bulletins and gazettes of the era. Yet, if the new poetry carried over some of the sardonic tenor of the anti-official publications during the Porfiriato, the straightforward political denunciations and proclamations of periodicals such as the Communist Party's official organ, El Machete, published from 1924 to 1929, were in a noticeably less humorous register. So compare El Machete's tagline, penned by Siqueiros' wife, Graciela Amador, with the passage from Manuel Maples Arce's first stridentist writing. So El Machete, the Communist Party's official organ in Mexico, the tagline reads, El machete sirve para cortar la caña, para abrir las veredas en los bosques umbríos, decapitar culebras, tronchar toda cizaña y humillar la soberbia de los ricos impíos. It rhymes. My translation does not rhyme, but here we go. The machete is used to cut the sugar cane, to clear paths in the shady forests, decapitate snakes, weed out the chaff, and shame the arrogance of the merciless rich. Manuel Maples Arce's Comprimido Estridentista, Stridentist Tablet, published in the first issue of the periodical he founded in 1921, Actual, Hoja de Vanguardia, is equally belligerent, but full of irreverent humor, poetic ambiguity, and intricate pronouncements riddled with newly coined words. The broadside itself was likely designed by artist Fermín Revueltas, who taught in one of the escuelas de pintura al aire libre, one of the outdoor painting schools, and you see a lot of those posters in the exhibition. And more than posit divisions between the rich and the newly empowered masses, Maples Arce's is a call for the intelligentsia to get up to speed, embrace cosmopolitan modernity, and shed the past and its ossified provincial traditions. So you see the dandy in the poster, that's Manuel Maples Arce, and he's conveniently located under the number one, right? So he's the number one poet, of course. And then you see something that looks like an acrostic, like a poem laid out vertically. And that reads, éxito, success. Death to Father Hidalgo, down with San Rafael, St. Lazarus, corner, post no bills. And this, okay, what follows is an excerpt, translated by C.M. Kasia. So I'll read you some of this. Let us cosmopolitanize ourselves. It is no longer possible to keep ourselves in the conventional confines of national art. The news expends itself by telegraph over the skyscrapers, those marvelous skyscrapers so vituperated by everyone. There are dromedary clouds, and among their knitted muscles, the electric elevator moves. 48th floor, 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. We've arrived. And over a gymnast's parallel bars in the open air, locomotives swallow kilometers. Steam that smokes towards absence. Everything approaches and goes away in the moving moment. Maples Arce's stridentism advocates for a type of poetry in which sincere emotion is a form of supreme arbitrariness and specific disorder. It is adamantly anti-lyrical. No retrospection, no futurism, the whole world, there, quiet, marvelously illuminated on the stupendous axis of the present moment, observed in the prodigy of its unique, unmistakable emotion and sensorially electrolyzed on the suprematist eye, vertical over the meridian instant, always the same and always new. We make nowism. So Maples Arce collaborated with a number of the artists included in the exhibition, as did other stridentist poets such as Germán List Arzubide. In individual poetry collections such as Urbe, Superpoema Bolchevique, and Cinco Cantos, illustrated by Jean Charlot, and translated actually in 1929 into English by John Dos Passos, which is interesting. So this drawing of Maples Arce is by Jean Charlot, and it's in the book. And then this is the book that Gabriela also showed. Avant-garde publications such as Ser and Irradiador from 1923 regularly featured illustrations by the artists in the exhibition and also experimented with image text compositions. So here you have Irradiador. And then this is the logo for the publications of the Stridentist editions. And Fermín Revueltas also develops like these attempts at logos for Stridentist publications. And so I'm just going to read you that one that looks like a concrete poem of sorts, a visual poem. I won't read you all of it, but it says things like, desamodórrense, despiértense, romperemos ranciolatrias. Rid yourself of sluggishness. Wake up. We will break rancid idolatries. All one word. Listen to Manuel Maples Arce. Okay, so the last collaboration between a poet and an artist I will discuss is Mexican artist Emilio Amero and the poet Federico Garcia Lorca. Their collaboration began not in Mexico, but in New York City. Amero had worked on murals with the likes of José Clemente Orozco before settling in New York. His photograms and illustrations had graced everything from the pages of the Contemporáneos magazine to the Brooklyn Eagle and the New Yorker. Those are pretty cool. And he also designed advertisings for the New Yorker. He had a studio on 60th Street. I'm not sure if East or West. That writer and arts patron Antonieta Rivas Mercado described in her journals as a bustling meeting point for the many Spanish-language artists, musicians, and writers converging on the city during the Jazz Age. She praised his beautiful, tasteful things, his radio, piano, library, and perfect film projector. It is in this studio that Amero screened 777, an experimental film whose title alludes to the shapes of levers in the gadgets and adding machines in it. Seeing this film inspired Lorca to try his hand at a screenplay for an avant-garde film to be titled Trip to the Moon, Viaje a la Luna. What better vehicle than film to mimic the city's frantic pace and decry its grit and its greed? As much a riff on Méliès' 1902 film as a nod to the eponymous cyclorama and Coney Island's Luna Park and the vomiting multitudes of its mechanical rides. That's a reference to Lorca's poet in New York, by the way. Lorca's Viaje a la Luna was written on the spot at the studio. The poet gifted it to Amero when he was done and gave him permission to do whatever he wanted with it. The film was never completed and no trace of it remains. But the effervescence palpable in Lorca's writing continues to spark the imaginations of those who encounter it, very much like the prints we have been discussing here tonight. Thank you.
Can everybody hear us? Yes? Yes? Great. So now we're going to have a conversation about these really phenomenal presentations that we just heard. And again, thank you to everybody for coming tonight. So first I wanted to start with Gabriela. So it's significant that despite the prominence of photography in newspapers and journals that exploded during the 1930s, artists still believed in the relevancy and impact of prints as tools for political education, assuming that audiences would find them intelligible and persuasive. How do you view contemporary technology's impact on political imagery disseminated via social media, memes, and artificial intelligence?
Well, that's precisely the presentation that I made. I think that there is a social vocation in Mexico, and I can see that present in many artists. Well, I have one here, precisely next to me, and I also have seen, for example, Paloma Contreras Lomas is an artist who's doing a residency here in New York, and she worked recently on a performance in which she used a TED Talk as a model for talking about atrocities that had been happening as a result of violence, of molecular violence in not only in Mexico but in the world. So I think it's a she used technology in through performance was filtered through technology, but also I think, for instance, Tania Candiani uses artificial intelligence in a way that the stones, you listen the violence of the stones and you see the materiality of the violence. So you can transform those tools easily, and I see that vocation in Mexico. I don't know, my colleagues can. They're Mexican. I don't know, but I'm observing from outside.
Thank you. So maybe I'll just move on and have like one question for each of you, and then we can. So, ¿te lo hago en español? ¿Te hago la pregunta en español? En inglés, okay. So I'm very interested in how you discuss collective imaginaries provoked by Hollywood movies and TV series that are, vestiges of fascism and Cold War imaginaries and these dystopian scenarios that you describe. So I was curious about how you see the role of the poster, which is kind of like a shout from the wall. I use the word slogan, since we see so many wonderful examples in the exhibition. And for example, the Taller de Gráfica Popular. And so I was wondering about what you think about posters from your point of view as an artist, the posters that are in the show.
Yes, the word, the key word is popular. For me, I grew in the downtown in the center of the Mexico City. Around my home is sports, a gym. People go to wrestling, like luchadores, Mexican wrestling, boxings. And around me is cinemas. And they put Mexican movies and North American movies. And I grow up with that information. And for me, it's very important, the poster, the graphic popular poster. And the example is when I grow up, I love rock music. And for me, it's very important, the psychedelic poster from San Francisco, from, that part of the music and the heritage of this visual art in the popular culture. That's the connection with my work. Yes, yeah.
Yeah, because you do that in some of your works too, where you have these all over kind of designs with posters, works, drawings that look like posters. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, great. Thank you. So, Monica, I was really interested in when you were talking about the different sort of like valences of the word translation and sort of how you view the question of translation when you're studying these prints and these magazines, and as you were doing when you were speaking about them today.
Yes. Well, one of the things that I'm very interested in is this syncretism of image and text that doesn't necessarily have a one-to-one correspondence. There is no we use the word illustration, but really the images of the artists don't really illustrate the poems, because poems are impossible to illustrate. A good poem is impossible to illustrate, I would say. But these competing vocabularies, the seduction of the image, of course, is always is what hits you first, and as a mechanism to draw in the viewer, the reader, who's becoming a reader and a viewer at the same time. Of course, reading involves visuality as well. But the complication of those two genres on the page, especially in the poetry books, is really fascinating to me. And of course, it was possible because of the technology. Had these not been prints, the books would have been fine arts books that were impossible to acquire for regular people. So this makes access to the prints in the poetry books as democratic as possible, as democratic as the poetry is, and that's a fascinating syncretism there, or synergy is the word I'm looking for as well.
Mhm.
Yeah. Mhm.
Thank you. So actually, this is maybe a question for all three of you if you want to comment on. I think it's really moving to see these examples of the tremendous impact of works produced by Diego Rivera or Jose Clemente Orozco and others when they were in the United States through the mural commissions, exhibitions, and collecting by prominent museums like the Met. And I was, I think something that goes through there too is these artistic exchanges between, for example, the Taller de Gráfica Popular and African-American artists like Elizabeth Catlett. So I was wondering, if you could talk about sort of the relationships between, contemporary Mexican artists and writers and, maybe with the US or just in general.
But I think it's interesting also that this collection was put together by Jean Charlotte because Mexico has been always cosmopolitan and received these exchanges. I mean, it's not only Duchamp who came and formed a collection of, high modernist Beaux-Arts, but I think Jean Charlotte was very much ingrained in the Mexican fabric. And he was so nailed to them that he knew that, there is a vocation there, there's a social, political, very, very strong vocation, and that's reflected in the collection. And that's very important. And we see many artists, and many critics and many agitators in Mexico coming back and forth. So I don't know, I see it because probably I'm one of them. I go very often to Mexico, but Mexico is very friendly to people who really want to interact.
In the 70s, the generation of the Beat generation, William Burroughs, Jack Kerouac, go to Mexico to the experience to cross the border and live another kind of possibilities in the way of the poetry and the writers and that kind of stuff. And for many people, very young writers in Mexico take that experience and make a different approach to the writing in the 70s, like Jose Agustin, Parmenides Garza Saldaña. It's a young generation of the new writers in Mexico is with this connection with the American beat generation.
Yeah, but it's really interesting to think about exchange, like a real exchange. Like, does it go both ways or not, right? And that's really the question, because it tends to not go both ways. So for instance, it's not a coincidence that like the images translate, but the text doesn't. Because, for instance, just thinking about the Stridentist Manifesto, the references, as cosmopolitan as it wants to be, the references tend to be very local. Like you read Muera San Rafael, and even the translator of the book, the translations I was reading from, what is that? Why San Rafael? He thought it was an actual saint. No, it actually was a part of the city where the rich people in the 1920s lived near San Rafael, and the poor people lived near San Lázaro. So when he says Muera San Rafael and Muera San Lázaro, it's everybody in the city, like, stop being regional, He's trying to be cosmopolitan. But of course, nobody's going to get that. I am not aware of the impact of John Dos Passos' translation of Urbe, of Maples Arce, in English poetry at all. I don't think it had any impact, quite frankly. But it's interesting to think of a delay type of return or exchange through someone like Bolaño, because Bolaño had such an impact that then people here started reading Bolaño and being interested in not only infrarealism, the poets in that coterie that he was a part of, but they start looking back, because the premise of the Savage Detectives is that they're looking for the only female participant of the Stridentist movement. And so then people here start going like, Stridentismo, I've never heard of that. What is it? And so I think that's like, yeah, almost 100 years later, there's interest and an interest in the writing, even though the visual vocabulary had been popular all along and traveled the world.
But do you think this is because Bolaño was a local speaker? He understood he was Chilean, and he lived in Spain.
Yes, but the Savage Detectives, it's set in Mexico City.
I know.
And
All his work, all the important work, it's
oh, are you saying that the reason why it crossed over is
Yeah.
because he wasn't Mexican?
yeah.
No, I just think that it's because he was the perfect writer for that time. The perfect Latin American writer that could actually translate something about Latin American, about the experience of being a young person in Latin America in 68 and so on. You know, and also like he's post boom, exactly. Yeah. Mhm.
I was thinking about Candiani too, and all of your talks of this idea of political solidarities, you know, across different countries and different periods. And I don't know if there was anything that you wanted to sort of address regarding that, or any of the works in the show that you felt, you know, spoke to that. For me, obviously, because I work on the Spanish Civil War, it was very moving to me to see the solidarity in Mexico, and the fact that they welcomed so many amazing Spanish artists and just political exiles to Mexico. So you know, that was very moving to me.
Solidarity, I think the works of women printers are pretty amazing. You know, people celebrate the three usual suspects and also the three artistas who are not, you know, in the shadow, but they're not in the shade. And in the shadow, they're you know, they're known thanks to Linda Klitsch, who produced, you know, this wonderful book, which helped me a lot understanding the material. But I think the women, you know, Lola Cueto, those are amazing. And even Mariana Jampolsky, or even the remake of the Diego Rivera mural by Tina Modotti. You know, there are things that mesmerizes you in the exhibition of women.
Yeah, that
Sorry
was
to be this feminist, but I think it's worth, you know, paying attention to these materials.
there's so many stories that you can trace through there. You can, and it's just so moving too, that it was this artist Jean Charlot, and that it's, you know, it's sort of seeing it through his eyes and his communities, and then bringing it here to New York and being able to see that, and featuring artists like Gabriela was saying that we don't often see, such as some of the women artists that you were mentioning, or these connections with like Elizabeth Catlett, or you know, the early prints, the very beginning of the history of printmaking in Mexico. So I hope that all of you can go see the show and see it, as Gabriela said, more than once, because it's really, it's something that hasn't been seen in New York, and there's a lot of really rare and important works in the show. So thank you so much for coming.